Good evening to all of you. We are back again with another exciting session. I, Ajay Jha, on behalf of ACS India team, welcome you to today's ACS Science Talks. Today, we are pleased to have Professor Asha SK with us. She received her PhD from the Department of Inorganic and Physical Chemistry, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and later joined as a polymer scientist at GE Plastics John F. Wells Tech Center, Bangalore. Currently, she is Senior Principal Scientist and Chair, Polymer Science and Engineering Division at CSIR National Chemical Laboratory, Pune. Her research interests are in the fields of synthesis and self-assembly to build higher ordered polymer architectures for potential applications in the optoelectronic devices. She has several awards and accolades to her credit. To mention a few, CRSI Bronze Medal, Young Research Award, 5th IUMRS International Conference, Asia, member of the Subject Expert Committee for Technical Evaluation of Proposals under Women Scientist Scheme. She is editorial advisory board member of ACS Journal Macromolecules. Now, I would like to invite Professor Asha to deliver her talk. Over to Professor Asha, please.
Thank you, Mr. Jha, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. The title of my talk is Pi-conjugated polymers for enantioselective separation and biosensing. The introduction has been given, but I had prepared a slide to show what is my academic background. That is, I completed my PhD from ISC Bangalore in 2000, after which I had a postdoctoral stint in the Technical University of Eindhoven with Professor Bert Mayer. And after that, I moved back to Bangalore and worked in GE for 1 year before joining the CSIR systems. First, I worked in the CSIR lab in Trivandrum, then known as RRL Trivandrum, now known as NIST. And in 2007, from 2007 end, I am in this current organization, National Chemical Laboratory. This is a quick summary of the research group and some pictures of the current and my research group in a span of a couple of years. So basically, my research focuses on pi-conjugated polymers, and where we look into its optoelectronic applications. We also look at the biosensing applications. The self-assembly of these polymers is also a big motivation to work on these systems in my group. Recently, that is the last couple of years, we have started working on additive manufacturing or 3D printing in a big way, with the Center of Excellence also established for this activity in NCL. So moving on to the conducting polymers. So most of you know that pi-conjugated polymers or materials, they are molecules that have alternate sigma and double bonds. So they are mainly classified as the N-type or P-type. That is, N-type means they are the electron transporters, or the P-type means they are the hole transporters. And there are also those systems which can transport both electrons and holes, known as the ambipolar systems. So the literature abounds with the information on the P-type systems, or the electron, or the hole transporters. They are the electron-rich systems. But the last decade or so, the research on the N-type or the electron-poor systems, as well as the ambipolar systems, are also increasing. So one design criteria for this ambipolar system is to have a donor and acceptor unit connected together, like shown here in an alternate fashion. So this will help tune the energy level, resulting in the ambipolar materials. So when I say photoelectronic optoelectronic applications, there are several, like the solar cells, light emitting diodes, field effect transistors, etc. Here I have shown a schematic of a all polymer solar cell as a typical example. So in this type of a device, what you have is the active layer, which is a mixture of this donor and acceptor material, which is sandwiched between the two electrons, the ITO electrode and the other metal electrode. And the working principle of this solar cell is summarized in this clip here. So when light falls on this active layer, the excitons are created. Excitons are the coupled electron hole pairs. So unlike the inorganic systems where you get free electrons and holes, here it is a coupled system, and energy is required to overcome this binding energy. So this energy can be gained at this interface of a donor and the acceptor material. So since the time the organic materials were used as active electrode, active layer in these setups, starting from a single electrode material to bilayer, the process has evolved, and now a bulk heterojunction concept has come up, where the intermixing of the acceptor and donor materials is done, so that because the excitone diffusion at the DA interface is the most important step. And for that, the donor and acceptor should be arranged in the nanoscopic length scale of about 10 to 20 nanometer scale. Because otherwise, what happens is that if within this length scale, if the excitone does not see an interface, it will recombine and die, and then it will fail to generate the free charges. So this is the most important aspect of the for improving the efficiency of any these type of devices. So from this, from the bulk heterojunction concept, this bulk heterojunction also has some drawbacks. That is, over a period of time, what will happen is that there is a phase separation of the donor and acceptor material, and they don't have a proper morphology. So the morphology is an all important aspect in these type of devices. So then this concept of this ideal bulk heterojunction concept came up, where if you have this alternate arrangement of the donor and acceptor with the microphase separation at the length scale of 10 to 20 nanometer, if such a layer can be created, then you are creating a separate pathway, efficient pathway for the donor and acceptor. So this is the basic background concept of design principle involving these type of materials. So in my research group, we focus mostly on the acceptor type materials. As I said, that the literature is rich with the electron rich materials or the donor type materials, whereas the number of acceptor materials are a little less. So our research focuses on these type of materials. And among all the acceptor type materials or the N-type polymeric semiconductors, the polymers based on this unit, this is the naphthalene bicimide or the naphthalene diamide, and its higher analog is there, the pearlene diamide. They are very promising because they have high electron affinity, good absorption, good thermal and photo stability. So these are some plus points of these type of systems. And in this also, this particular polymer that is shown here, this is labeled as N2200 of the polyurethane active ink. This was designed and developed by Facchetti, and now it is a commercially available polymer. This is one of the widely used acceptor type polymers because of its very high electron mobility, like 0.5 centimeter square per volt second. And when this polymer is used as the acceptor polymer along with other donor type polymers in an all polymer solar cell, several very good power conversion efficiencies have been obtained. This data is a little old data. Now higher power conversion efficiencies also have been obtained. One of the very good power conversion efficiencies have been obtained with this combination of this N2200 as the acceptor polymer with this PTB70H as the donor polymer. But in these cases also, people soon realize that there are some issues because of this flat aromatic high aromatic nature of this molecule, it has a tendency to stack. And sometimes the stacking is not good for the device performance. So this later on leads to development of crystalline phases in the active layer, which then leads to phase separation. So one important aspect when working with this type of polymers is to try and see what one can do to avoid this. So in my research group, what we have adopted a two-way approach. That is a covalent approach. That means where you have the donor acceptor systems covalently linked together like this, or you have the self-assembly approach, so as to avoid this pi stacking and to improve the electron transport in these materials. So, summarized in this slide is a couple of approaches that we adopted with this type of materials, especially the N2200 polymers. So as I mentioned earlier, this is this particular unit, these two units, this is the N2200. It can lead to aggregation leading to poor device performance. So to overcome this, what we have designed is a copolymer of this by incorporation of its higher analog, the pearlene bicimide, randomly along the backbone in various mole ratios. So after studying various mole ratios, we found that a mole ratio of about 30 mole percentage of this leads to a very optimum result. And when this is used as a acceptor layer along with this PTB7TH as a donor polymer in an all polymer solar cell device fabrication, we obtain 5% power conversion efficiency. And this is with reference to if we only used this N2200 as the reference material. So we made the N2200 also in our lab under the same conditions. And when that was used, the power conversion efficiency was 3%, which could be improved by the incorporation of this bulky unit there. So the explanation is that the random incorporation of this bulky unit prevents the pi-pi stacking. And very recently, in the last few years, there are reports coming out that these type of materials can also be used for energy storage. Until now, for the last decade, it was mostly used for energy generation. But now, recently, energy storage in the form of supercapacitor or battery material, electrode material is also being looked into. And supercapacitors, as you know, are energy storage devices having desirable properties like high power density, high cycling stability, etc. In this scenario also, the most studied materials for the supercapacitor applications are various forms of carbon like the CNT, graphene, or metal oxides, and conducting polymers also like polythiophene, polyphenylene, pyrrole, polyaniline, etc. Because these conducting polymers have some advantage over the other materials because they are flexible, the synthesis can be comparatively easier or cheaper, and their mechanism of charge storage is through the Faraday charge storage. And here also among the most reported, as I said, it is all p-type or electron-rich polymers. And but the p-type conducting polymers show limited charge storage capability. If the polymer can be used where both p-doped and n-doped polymer can be used, it can store charge both in the positive and negative electrode during charging cycle. So in this regard, the ambipolar or the DA type polymers, like whose structures are shown here, they can significantly enhance the operating voltage when they are fabricated as the supercapacitor electrode materials. So in our research group, we have evaluated these NDI type or PDI type polymers, DA donor acceptor type polymers as type 3 supercapacitor electrode material in combination with carbon nanotube. And their performance again was evaluated using this the N2200 as a reference material. And we have obtained good capacitance values and stability. This is a very important factor. Stability over 5,000 cycles with almost 100% retention of these values, and flexible devices also could be fabricated. So this was the approach now what we are doing is we are trying to optimize the continuous flow synthesis of these type of materials, because if you make these polymers in the batch process, which is the usual process, every time you make the polymer, there can be a deviation in the molecular weight, or there is a distribution of the molecular weight. So that impedes the device efficiency. Whereas if you use continuous flow synthesis, this is a reproducible method of scaling up also, and so many unwanted side reactions also can be avoided. So in the last 1 or 2 years, although this process has been adopted for the regular polymers, for pi conjugated polymers, not many reports are available. Although in the last 1 to 3 years, these reports are also coming out. So this is right now an area that we are focusing on. So moving on to the self-assembly approach that we use for these type of systems. So previous slide was a covalent approach, connecting the donor and acceptor covalently and trying to modify their morphologies. And in the self-assembly approach, our aim is to improve the electron transport of these materials by using some templates and self-assembling them. For instance, here what I have shown is that this is the Perlin bicimide. See, the polymers, the covalently linked polymers are difficult to make, whereas making a small molecule and assembling can be a much better approach. So here we have made a small molecule of the Perlin bicimide and self-assembled it with a polymer. This is a poly 4-vinyl pyridine. So the schematically it would look like this. If this is the polymer backbone, we are assembling these N-type material along this polymer backbone. So the polymer brings in the mechanical stability, flexibility, and the small molecule brings in the charge transportability. So the way it is done is just solution mix them together and evaporate of the solvent, and then now the system acts as a single unit. So we have characterized them both in solution and in the solid form also. This is the powder XRD, and this is a TEM image. The apparent materials, that is neither the small molecule nor the polymer, shows any specific morphology. But once you self-assemble them, you see this beautiful lamellar structure showing, which is proof that this has been self-assembled. And also the studies show that even in solution, this is self-assembly is retained, because this is the typical signature of the Perlin self-assembly happening. And the most important proof came from the charge transport measurement. We measured the electron transportability of the pristine Perlin molecule, which was in the 10 power minus 7 range. And after self-assembling them, this unit, when the self-assembled supramolecular comb polymer, when we check the mobility, it has increased by 4 orders to 10 power minus 3, which is a proof of that our hypothesis has been valid. So we have extended this approach to various types of Perlin and naphthalene molecules and designed in several ways. The self-assembly we also took to donor acceptor type self-assembly. In the previous example, where the P4VP was an insulating polymer, we have now used a donor polymer, which is a polythiophene. This is a block polymer. One block has this hexyl chain here, whereas the other block has a carboxyl terminal unit, with which this Perlin molecule was self-assembled, again schematically shown like this. So now here it exhibits both the hole and electron transportability. Hole transportability because the backbone is the donor polymer, and the electron mobility comes from this small molecule which is self-assembled. And this is some recent work where we have made the block polymer of the polystyrene block P4VP. So the block polymer itself self-assembles into this beautiful morphology like this. But when you add the small molecule, which can selectively self-assemble only with the P4VP unit of this block polymer, the same morphology is modified into this type of structures. And we see that this is an assembly within an assembly. The length scale is different. Whereas this length scale is in the 100 nanometer scale, this is in the much shorter length scale. And we could also show that in solution. Suppose if we vary the chain length of this block, the starting block, this is a polystyrene and this is P4VP. If we increase the block length and then do the self-assembly with the small molecule, these type of morphologies are obtained. The core shell type structure with a long hairy structure or a short hairy structure, which we can trace with NMR also as new peaks coming up. This was a beautiful study which we could demonstrate for the first time that in solution also this is retained. So these are some of the concepts that we did with the pi conjugated material for photovoltaic applications. Now moving on to the topic of my talk, that is the using these pi conjugated materials polymers for enantioselective separation. So coming to the topic chirality. So chirality, as you know, that it is symmetry which is everywhere in nature, and we associate symmetry with beauty, but we would be surprised to know that on the human body, although on the exterior it looks symmetric, internally there is a lot of asymmetry. There is the organs are on different located on different sides of the left and right sides of the body. But in nature, chirality or handedness is a striking property of nature. Many organic molecules like the DNA, which is a right-handed helix structure, and the proteins, which is made up of amino acids, which are chiral, they all have specific functions. And they also have a high degree of chemical chirality exclusively of one type of enantiomer. So this is the factor that sustains life. But in the synthetic examples, the importance of chirality or handedness, especially in drugs, was brought to light in a very devastating way almost 50, 60 years ago with the specific example shown here of thalidomide. This is a drug which was sold to pregnant women to reduce their morning sickness. So it was initially sold as a 50-50 mixture, racemic mixture of the R and S isomers before anybody knew the effect of this. So what happened was that the many of the children born from women who took these medicines ended up with severe birth defects. So they were known as the thalidomide babies. So this was a huge tragedy which forced the world to look into the importance of chirality. And it was figured out that while the one of the isomer, the left-handed molecule was effective, the right-handed was highly toxic. So from since then, the preparation of the enantiomerically pure molecule has been very important. So a drug molecule, for its registry, the enantiomeric purity also has to be established. As shown here are some other examples also where the chiral molecules, when because of their different enantiomeric nature, they give different flavor to the natural products that are present. So the question of how to make the enantiomerically pure compounds. So one approach is the one which is even now followed in mostly by the drug companies, which is the synthesis of enantiomerically pure compounds. So this will yield 100% enantiomerically pure compounds, but the limitations are that it is expensive and it uses several hazardous metal catalysts, and even small changes in the chiral ligands or the conditions can severely skew the yields obtained. So, which impacts the cost of the material also. Another approach is the racemic approach. So, where you make the do the synthesis using racemic mixture, and after the racemic mixture is formed, now use methods to separate them. So here also there are several methods to bring about the separation, enantiomer selective crystallization using external seeding agent, diastereomeric approach, chromatographic approach, and the membrane-based filtration approaches. So here now I am going to talk about the membrane-based polymer, membrane-based approach that we have adopted in our lab using the conjugated polymers. So we have designed a polyfluorine molecule with this amino acid protected. This is glutamic acid, L-glutamic acid. So it is in the protected form here. This is appended to the side chain of the polyfluorine, making the polyfluorine also chiral. So this molecule, we although have not shown here, the circular dichrosis spectra of the polymer powder confirm the chiral nature of the polymer with alpha helix structure. And the morphology of the polymer when scanned with scanning electron microscopy showed these porous helical structure, porous fibrous filaments. And when these porous polymers, powder polymers were used as for the enantiomeric separation in water. So it is a mixture of D and L isomers, and into that the polymer powder is added, and it is led to stir for 48 hours. And then you filter and remove this polymer. So then, and then you evaluate the CD spectrum of the remaining water. So what was found was that this is a reference L molecule. Our polymer is L polymer. You should remember. So the remaining solution is richer in D. Why? Because the L enantiomer is selectively taken up by the polymer powder. So the solution becomes richer in D. So we have used several classes of materials ranging from sugars to alcohols to amino acids to test the enantiomeric separation in this way. That is, you take the polymer powder, you put it into a equimolar enantiomeric mixture of D and L isomers of these various family of materials. And then after 48 hours, filter and remove the polymer. Then evaluate the CD spectrum of the remaining solution. And we find that the solution is rich in the D isomer because the L isomer is taken up by the polymer. So for various materials, for various molecules used, you find various percentage enantiomeric excess in the as shown in the table here. So moving on, we wonder whether this property was due to the that specific morphology of the polymer. I showed you the SM image, which is the porous fibrous morphology. So whether that was the reason for that. So for that, we designed two more polymers shown here, polyfluorine again. But this time, instead of the glutamic acid in the previous example, we used aspartic acid. We made both the L and the D aspartic acid, protected aspartic acid appended polyfluorines, and their molecular weights are also shown here. These polymers, when we check for the morphology, we realized that they were not, they did not show the porous structure, and in the powder form, their separation efficiency was very poor. Although it showed some enantiomeric separation, but the efficiency was very poor. Then we thought of the membrane approach. That is, this is commercially available anodic alumina membrane. So we deposited our polymer on this anodic alumina membrane, like this shown here schematically. And this is a SEM image confirming the deposition of the polymer on the membrane. And then what we did was that, so we could make different membranes, either the D membrane or the L membrane. And now if you put the membranes into the enantiomeric mixture, the membranes could selectively take up one enantiomer. So supposing if you took the D polymer, D membrane, that means, and this is the L reference compound. So the remaining solution is shown here. So the D membrane will take up selectively the D isomer. So the solution will be rich in the L isomer. So this was true for the other type of membranes also. And with this work, what we could do, we could show was that compared to the previous system, with here the membrane approach, we could attain even much higher enantiomeric separation, as high as 95%. And we could also show that if you, for these experiments, we have used only 2 membranes each for the separation studies. But if you use more membranes, then this the enantiomeric excess could be pushed even higher to 98 or 98% also. So this was something for the enantiomeric separation using the pi conjugated polymers. Now moving on to using these polymers as fluorescent sensors. So as I said, these polymers were polyfluorines, but the polyfluorines are fluorescent polymers, blue emitting polymers. In the enantiomeric separation that I showed before, their fluorescence property was not required at all. But now in the fluorimetric sensors, you know that when conjugated polymers as a fluorescent sensor, they have the added advantage of the amplified signal, which means compared to a small molecule sensor, any binding action at one end of a polymer chain results in the complete quenching of the emission of the entire chain, which means that you require only less amount of the polymer to do the sensing job. So this was a concept which is well established almost 20 years back itself. So the fluorescent polymers are used as fluorescent for sensing applications. So we use this polymer for sensing bilirubin. Now, what is bilirubin? So bilirubin is the breakdown product of hemoglobin. It contains this tetrapyrrole moiety with 6 intramolecular hydrogen bonds existing in this ridge tile conformation. So under normal physiological conditions, the bilirubin is mostly present in the conjugated form, which is water soluble and can be removed from the body. The unconjugated or the free bilirubin is usually taken out by conjugation with, by forming ester in the form of glucuronic esterases. Then it becomes water soluble and then it is taken out. So if there is the liver disorder, what will happen is that the amount of this bilirubin in the system increases. And when it increases beyond the normal level, it leads to conditions like jaundice, yellowing of the skin, and other, and in the severe cases, it can even lead to death. So detection of the amount of the bilirubin in the body fluids is an important method or diagnosing tool for the liver disorders. And clinically, the level of bilirubin detection is done by this DISO method. That is a colorimetric based method. What is done here is that the diazotization reaction of bilirubin and sulfanilic acid. And then it is detected using a absorption spectrometer. So the major disadvantage is that it takes a longer time and there can be inaccuracy in the measurement also. So alternate methods, especially fluorimetric based ones, because it is very sensitive and it can be fast, have been going on in the world. So what we designed was that we realized that the polyfluorine emission matches with the absorption of bilirubin. So shown here is the absorption of polyfluorine, and the red is the emission of polyfluorine. And this matches perfectly with the absorption of bilirubin, which means this can form a very good Fret pair. Means energy transfer, this can form a good combination where energy transfer can happen. So we designed a polyfluorine like this, with this pentan molecule, and then use this for detecting bilirubin in THF. So this is the emission from polyfluorine. The moment you add bilirubin, the emission is quenched so much. Actually, bilirubin is a weakly, very faintly emitting molecule. Its fluorescence quantum yield is shown here. It is weakly green emitting material. So if you normalize the spectra, you can see that the green emission of bilirubin is coming up. The blue color of polyfluorine disappears and the green of the bilirubin comes up. So this was our initial work and this was done in THF. Then we wondered if we could do the same in water, because in the blood, the test has to be done in blood serum, then the polymer has to be water soluble. So what we realized was that, as I shown earlier, glucuronic acid is the molecule which takes away from our body the unconjugated bilirubin. It forms glucuronic esterases, which makes the bilirubin water soluble, and it is removed from the body. So we thought, why not use glucuronic acid to make polyfluorine water soluble, and at the same time it can also use as a selective receptor. So two things in one go, if this can be achieved. So this is the polymers that we designed. This is the synthesis is not shown here for want of time. So we made two polymers. This is polyfluorine, only fluorine in the backbone. Here it is a copolymer with the phenyl ring, and this is the glucuronic acid. And as a reference molecule, we made this polymer with glucose also. So if water solubility is the only reason, whether this will also do the same job of the detection of bilirubin. And summarized here is our studies with this system. So here again, these polymers, they match perfectly with the emission of polymer matches the absorption of bilirubin. So these could be used here. Left side is the absorption spectrum of these three polymers with increasing addition of bilirubin, and right side is the quenching of the fluorescence. The first two are the glucuronic acid based polymer, and the last one is the reference glucose based polymer. Immediately you can see that the glucose based polymer is not so sensitive, not so useful. So here is shown the plot in different ways. That is the area of this quenching of this versus increase of this bilirubin fluorescence, or the quenching of this intensity. You can see that the blue, this one, that is the glucose, is not a good polymer. This was the reason, because the glucose appendage did not make the polymer very much water soluble. It was water soluble, but not to the extent of the other two polymers. So these two were taken forward for the study with the in blood serum. So shown here in blood serum, what actually happened was that this polymer, this homopolymer, it precipitated out in the blood serum. So finally, eventually, we could take only this polymer, this copolymer of fluorine and phenyl ring, for the bilirubin study in blood serum. Shown here, upper side is the this copolymer, and this is the in blood serum, the same quenching of polymer fluorescence and increase of the bilirubin emission. This again in the glucose we tried, because this glucose polymer did not precipitate out, but as shown before, it is not a very good sensing agent for this one, and you can see it in plotted here also. So and the selectivity and sensitivity also could be studied, and our polymer was found to be very selective for sensing only bilirubin in presence of other competing agents, and it could sense it in the clinically relevant range shown here. So we have a couple of publication and patents from this. So moving on, we thought that, okay, so the combination that is needed here is a system that emits in the same range as the absorption of bilirubin, and so that energy transfer can happen, and water solubility. So then we thought, why not use some other polymer, commodity polymer like polystyrene, instead of the conjugated polymer, because conjugated polymers, first, it is difficult to make and yield may not be high. So whereas polystyrene based systems are widely used, and it may be easy if we could extend the approach to that. So we found that this fluorescent molecule, this is called oligophenylene vinylene, we designed it as a crosslinker, and if that is used as a fluorophore, that its absorption, its emission perfectly again matches the bilirubin absorption. So this can do the job of the polyfluorine backbone in the sensing. And polyfluorine, by mini emulsion polymerization, we have the capability to make these type of beads where the surface is decorated with the glucuronic acid. So this is the synthesis shown here, how the styrene monomer was made with this glucuronic acid protected polymer. Then it was polymerized, and after polymerization, it is deprotected. So now the polymer became water soluble. Normally, polystyrene is hydrophobic, but now with this appendage, it became amphiphilic. So what we have done is that we use this polymer as a surfactant to bring about polymerization, mini emulsion polymerization of styrene, and in presence of this fluorescent cross-linker. And this is the mini emulsion polymerization system, and we get these beautiful beads, almost monodisperse in particle size, which is a blue fluorescent, which has blue fluorescence and decorated with the glutamic acid on the surface, glucuronic acid on the surface. So these are the same quenching studies, the quenching of the polymer fluorescence and increasing the bilirubin emission. Again, the sensitivities also it could be studied. And here you can see that the visual detection is much better than the polyfluorine case. This is the blue polyfluorine, and this is the in presence of bilirubin. It is a cyan color. So in short, what we have done here is that for the bilirubin detection, using we have done two systems, one with the polyfluorine and another with the polystyrene. So with the polyfluorine, we could go up to detection limit of 150 nanomolar, and with the polystyrene system, we could go even down to 20 nanomolars. And now quickly winding up, I would like to show a couple of slides on the new initiative that I have started in my group for the additive manufacturing. So additive manufacturing or 3D printing is a method by which you can convert a STL file into a physical object. You can print an object and get a 3D printed structure. So we have got this Center of Excellence was established in our laboratory last year, and we have received funding from the Ministry of Chemicals and Petrochemicals, and also from CSIR. And we are now slowly getting these facilities. Like we have there are different types of printing technologies also. Like it can be solution-based, light-based printing, that is using digital light processing. Or here again live processing, but the material is in the form of a paste. And this is a method where you take the polymer in the form of a filament, and then here it is printed. And here we also have a bio 3D printer where even cells and biocompatible materials can be printed. And these are other characterization facilities for the characterizing these printed materials. And this is just one slide summarizing quickly the 3D printing, two methods of 3D printing using my research area focuses on UV curing resin formulations. The light-based 3D printing approaches, the stereolithographic approach or the digital light processing approach, it uses resins. That means the starting material is a monomer, mixture of monomer. And you shine light on it, and where the light has fallen, only that part gets polymerized, and you can print materials like this. So we have developed our own resin materials, and with that we can add colors to it also. And now we are in the process of trying to make composite materials also using the 3D printing. So with composite materials, it becomes thick and pasty. So fluid-like flowability is not there. So we designed a 3D printer. This was just custom designed. So the pasty materials can be injected like this, and then light is also shown on this. So you can, then the material is getting printed here. So in short, that is the presentation that I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.